orthopedic lecturer at CMC, and I have done my MBBS from KIST Medical College in 2015, and then done my MS Ortho from JIPMER Pondicherry in 2019. So today we'll be talking about hand and foot injuries. And to give you an overview, so we'll be talking about hand and foot injuries. In hand injuries, we'll be briefly discussing about how to evaluate hand injuries. Then we'll be talking about fractures and dislocation involving hand that are common to hand, and then ligament and tendon injuries as well. And in foot injuries, we'll be discussing about Lisfranc injury, fifth metatarsal base fractures, which are peculiar, and then stress fractures related to foot. So talking about hand injuries, usually hand injuries are divided into either skeletal injury or soft tissue injury. And in most cases, either you can have isolated skeletal injury, or you can have only soft tissue injury, or you can have combination of both. So in skeletal injuries, you should look for fractures and dislocations. And in soft tissue injury, you can have problems with skin alone. So there can be laceration alone or with underlying tendon injury. Mostly these tendon injuries are missed when these are associated with lacerations, open injuries. Or you can have pure ligamentous injuries, like in case of gamekeeper's thumb or skier's thumb. Now, in evaluation of hand injuries, so you have to take history, examination, and then go into radiograph. So in history, age becomes important. So most of the hand injuries are in young population. So these are basically usually in age group of 15 or 16 to 45. And usually hand dominance is very important in case of hand injuries, because if someone is right hand dominant and they have injury in their right hand, so they will have a lot of problem in future. And similarly, occupation also becomes important for someone who is like a keyboard player or a surgeon. For them, hand becomes very important. And mechanism of injury also. So you can have either blunt injury where there is direct trauma to the hand, or penetrating injuries, or you can have crush injury, which is usually in case of machinery injuries. In examination, you need to examine the soft tissue. This means usually the skin and subcutaneous tissue. So usually in case of like clean laceration, there won't be much of soft tissue injury, but in case of crush injury or motor vehicle accidents, there will be a lot of soft tissue injuries. Then you need to assess the neurovascular status. So in case of hand, neurovascular status means distal artery and nerve. And you should also look for rotational deformity, as in orthopedics, in any fracture, no rotation is tolerated. So you should always look for rotational deformity, and if someone has a rotational deformity, I'll show you how to check for rotational deformity. These patients should be treated surgically. And then you should look for bone and joint for any fracture and dislocation, and then assess the tendons. Tendons, you have to assess both extensor as well as flexor. And then you have to move on to radiograph. Usually in hand and foot, we'll take anterior, posterior, and oblique views. But in case of dislocations, you have to take a lateral view. So talking about flexor and extensor joints. So when you have injuries to the tendons, you have to know at what level the tendon injury is. So to decide that, you have certain zones. So there are 5 zones in flexor and 8 in extensor. So this is not very important for you guys, but as a rule, you should know tendon injuries can be at various levels. And this zone 2 is called no match zone. No match zone, because if you have tendon injury in this zone and if you treat it surgically, if you repair it surgically, the outcomes are not good, because there is a very narrow space here, and usually the gliding action of tendon are difficult. So in these cases, you will have post-op adhesion, and patient won't have good functional outcome. Similarly, for extensor zone also, there are 8 zones, and you need to know that patient can have tendon injuries at various levels. For example, in zone 1, so zone 1 injuries, I'll give you an example later. This in flexor aspect, if you have a tendon injury at zone 1, these are called jersey finger, and I'll talk about in detail about jersey finger. And similarly, if you have injury in zone 1, extensor zone, these are all mallet finger injuries. So we'll talk about in detail later. Now, regarding flexor tendon testing, so usually the flexor digitorum profundus and flexor digitorum superficialis are two tendons that flex the TAP joint and the proximal interphalangeal joint. So these are very important to be tested individually. So flexor digitorum profundus usually have a single muscle mass, and from there you have separate tendons for your index finger, middle finger, ring finger, and little finger. So this flexor digitorum profundus, they act in a group. So to test this flexor digitorum profundus, these tendons will flex the DAP joint. So you need to stabilize the middle phalanx and then ask the patient to flex their distal interphalangeal joint. Note, you have to test the each finger individually. In case of flexor digitorum superficialis, this tendon will flex finger at proximal interphalangeal joint. But because flexor digitorum profundus also has action on proximal interphalangeal joint, you need to negotiate or cut the action of the flexor digitorum profundus to isolate the flexor digitorum superficialis. So in this picture, you can see with your other hand, you have to block the action of flexor digitorum profundus. How you can do that is you need to keep other fingers in extension, so that only flexor digitorum superficialis can work. So in this case, you can see the flexor digitorum superficialis or middle finger working. So patient has flexion of the PAP joint alone, and there is no flexion at DAP joint because the flexor digitorum profundus action is being blocked by keeping other fingers in extension. Regarding the rotational injury, usually when you ask the patient to flex their MCP, proximal interphalangeal joint and distal interphalangeal joint of all finger, the long axis of the finger will roughly point towards the scaphoid tubercle, as you can see in this picture. So if some patient has rotational deformity, if you are planning to assess whether this patient needs operative intervention or conservative intervention, you need to check for the rotational deformity. So in this case, you will have what is called scissoring of fingers. So you can see in this picture, if you have rotational deformity, the long axis will point away from the scaphoid tubercle. And talking about hand innervation, usually hand is innervated by median nerve, ulnar nerve, and radial nerve. So median nerve, they will have a palmar cutaneous branch which will supply the palm, and from this palmar cutaneous branch, you will have the distal nerves that supply the medial as well as the lateral aspect of each finger. So median nerve will supply 3.5 fingers and the palm, and then the ulnar nerve similarly will supply 1.5 finger and the palm. And these nerves, same palmar distal nerve, will also supply the dorsal aspect of hand as well, up to distal interphalangeal joint level. And on dorsum of the hand, you have two nerves only. So you have ulnar nerve and radial nerve. Both will supply half, exactly roughly half. So half will be supplied by radial nerve and almost half will be supplied by ulnar nerve. So in radiographs, you have to take PA or AP view and oblique view for all patients. And if you're suspecting any dislocations involving either the DAP, PAP or MCP joint, you need to take a lateral view as well. So now we'll be moving towards the metacarpal fracture. So metacarpal fracture are the common fracture which accounts for around 40% of all hand injuries. And again, these are common in young adults. Usually the fifth metacarpal is commonly injured and neck is the common site for fracture. So mechanism of injury. So you can have metacarpal fracture by direct blow, like any hard object falling on hand, or you can have a rotational injury with axial load, as in case of boxer's fracture. So if anyone is punching the wall, you can have a fracture of the metacarpal neck, fifth metacarpal neck fracture, which is also known as boxer's fracture. And then you can have metacarpal fracture with automobile injuries as well. So in these cases, you will have multiple fracture. It won't be an isolated fracture, and you will have a lot of soft tissue injuries as well. Now, metacarpal has a head, neck, shaft, and a base. So anatomically, you can classify metacarpal fractures as head fracture, or intra-articular fractures, neck fracture, shaft fracture, or a base fracture. Now, metacarpal neck fracture of fifth metacarpal is known as Bosse's fracture, and among the base fracture, first metacarpal, that is the metacarpal of the thumb, is a little bit unique, and we'll discuss about the first metacarpal base fracture in detail. So for all metacarpal fracture, the general principle of treatment is early mobilization, and you need to immobilize the patient in functional position. Now there is a dilemma whether to keep the patient in slab for 4 weeks or 6 weeks. Mostly you need to mobilize early, so it is better to keep the patient in slab for at least 4 weeks and not more than 4 weeks. So what is shown in this picture is called James position. So this is how you immobilize a metacarpal fracture. So in James position, you have dorsiflexion of wrist of around 30 to 40 degree, and your metacarpal joint is kept at flexion of 70 to 90 degree, and your DIP and PIP joint are kept in extension. So why James position is very important? Why do you need to keep your hand in this position? So as you can see, this is the metacarpal bone, and this is the proximal phalanx, and these are the collateral ligament. So what happens when you keep the metacarpal phalangeal joint in flexion? You'll have the maximum length of collateral. So collateral ligament will have their maximum length when you flex the MCP joint, and also the joint is stable when MCP is flexed and interphalangeal joint is extended. So stability is maximum, and the length of ligament also is maximum. So that's why it is important to keep the patient with their metacarpophalangeal joint in flexion and DIP and PIP joint in extension, so that even if patient have contracture, they won't have much of stiffness after you remove the slab. So for metacarpal fracture and in general for all hand injuries, these are the indication for operative treatment. So any open fracture, intra-articular fracture, or any fracture where there is rotational malalignment, you need to do an open reduction. Or also in case of multiple metacarpal shaft fracture as well. So that there are various operative treatment options. Now it is becoming very popular in case of metacarpal fracture. You can do either open reduction and internal fixation with plate, or you can use an external fixator, which can be augmented with screws and pins. This is one modality of treatment, and these external fixator are very important in case of comminuted intra-articular fracture and open fractures, where you can put your implants. Another routinely done procedure is your closed reduction and K-wire fixation. This can be done by closed reduction as well, or you can open the fracture site and put your wires. Now, first metacarpal base fracture is a little bit different. So you have what is called Bennett's and Rolando fracture. Now, what is difference between Bennett and Rolando fracture is that Bennett fracture is in partial articular fracture. So partial articular fracture means you have only 2 fragments. So the fracture line runs to the articular cartilage, and you have 2 fragments only. So in Rolando fracture, this is a complete articular fracture. You have more than 2 fragments. As you can see, you have 1, 2, and 3 fragments are there. Now, in both fractures, there are deforming forces that you need to know. One deforming force is this adductor pollicis muscle. So adductor pollicis muscle will pull the proximal fragment in adduction, and it will also supinate the fragment. And there is also another pull from abductor pollicis longus muscle. So this abductor pollicis longus muscle will pull the fragment proximally as well as abduct the fragment. So when you are doing a closed reduction in case of Bennett and Rolando fracture, you need to give a longitudinal traction to regain the length. Then you need to pronate the first metacarpal to negotiate the supination force from adductor, and then you need to give pressure at first metacarpal base and abduct the first metacarpal. So this is how you will achieve the closed reduction in case of Bennett and Rolando fracture. And once you are happy with the reduction, you can fix it with wires. If you can do it in closed method under CM guidance, then you put the pin in under CM guidance. But if you are not happy with the reduction, you have to sometimes open the fracture site. Now talking about the ligament injury. So first metacarpal phalangeal joint. So they will have what is called an ulnar collateral ligament on the middle side and a radial collateral ligament on the radial side. So gamekeepers or Skyer's thumb, these both are similar in the sense these will both involve the injury of the ulnar collateral ligament. So if this injury is acute, we call it Skyer's thumb, and if it is chronic, we call it gamekeeper's thumb. So what happens in gamekeeper or Skyer's thumb, patient will usually fall, and then this metacarpal phalangeal joint, there is a valgus force. So there is opening of the medial side, and in the process, you will injure the ulnar collateral ligament. Sometimes, as you all know, sometimes what happens, the adductor pollicis attaches to the middle phalanx, first middle phalanx. So what happens, this adductor pollicis aponeurosis becomes interposed between the damaged ligament, so that this ligament cannot heal on its own. So in these sort of lesions are known as Steiner's lesion, and you can diagnose this only on MRI. So in these cases, you need an open repair. So you have to repair the ulnar collateral ligament. For other cases, you can manage these injuries in a thumb spike or splint as shown in the figure. So this has to be worn for at least 4 weeks. Now talking about dislocations. So commonly you have in hand you have MCP dislocation. So this is metacarpophalangeal dislocation. So you have the metacarpal, this is the phalanx. So usually these dislocations are caused by hyperextension injury. So what happens is this MCP joint is hyperextended. So in the process, what happens? The proximal phalanx is displaced dorsally and metacarpal comes volarly. So usually these metacarpophalangeal dislocations are common in index finger or in thumb. So mostly in the index finger. And this is divided into simple and complex type based on whether there is interposition of sesamoid or volar plate. So what happens is this volar plate is attached to the metacarpal neck. So what happens during hyperextension injury, this volar plate becomes volar plate ruptures. So what happens when volar plate ruptures, you will have dislocation. So if there is no interposition of volar plate or sesamoid in between phalanx and metacarpal, then it is called simple dislocation. If there is interposition between the interposition of volar plate between the proximal phalanx and metacarpal, then it is called complex fracture. And there is something called Kaplan lesion in case of index finger metacarpophalangeal joint dislocation. So in this case, the metacarpal head buttonholes into palm volarly, and this becomes irreducible injury. In these cases, you have to open the joint. You cannot reduce the dislocation by closed means. There is mallet finger and jersey finger. So these are extensor tendon injuries, and jersey finger is flexor tendon injuries. Both injuries occur in zone 1 of extensor tendon and zone 1 of flexor tendon. So in mallet finger, what happens? There is a hyperflexion injury. So when there is a direct blow to the fingertip, as like when you are playing cricket and the ball hits your fingertip, there is a hyperflexion injury at the distal interphalangeal joint. So in this hyperflexion injury, what happens? There is avulsion of the extensor tendon from the base of distal phalanx. So this can happen with bony avulsion fracture, or you can have isolated tendon avulsion also. So this is about mallet finger. And in jersey finger, there is hyperextension injury. So what happens is, why this is called jersey finger is that, especially in cases of rugby, when player is grabbing hold of opponent's jersey, so their finger is in DIP is in flexion, and when this player tries to run away from the other player, what happens is this finger distal interphalangeal joint goes into hyperextension. So in this process, you will have an avulsion fracture of the distal phalanx base, and this is known as jersey finger. So usually how this patient will present is that if you have a mallet injury, patient won't be able to extend their distal interphalangeal joint. And if you have a Jesse finger, patient won't be able to flex their interphalangeal joint. So treatment for mallet finger, you can treat these injuries conservatively with a mallet splint as shown in the figure. But for Jesse finger, usually this flexor digitorum profundus tendons are very strong. So when you have Jesse finger, these patients will also have avulsion fracture of the distal phalanx space. So you have to treat it surgically, and you can do it with pin or screws. Now talking about foot injuries. So we'll be talking about Lisfranc injuries, which is very important. Then metacarpal metatarsal fracture, especially the fifth metatarsal fracture, base fractures, and then march fracture. So talking about Lisfranc injury. Now Lisfranc, what is Lisfranc joint? So it is an articulation between the medial cuneiform and the second metatarsal base. So if you take a cross section at this level, you'll come to this picture. So this is your first cuneiform or your medial cuneiform. This is your second metatarsal base, and this is your third metatarsal base. So a ligament running in between medial cuneiform and your second metatarsal base is known as Lisfranc ligament. But Lisfranc complex involves the dorsal ligament as well as the plantar ligament. So you also have a dorsal ligament which is very weak, which runs on the dorsal aspect of the cuneiform, first cuneiform and the second metatarsal. And you also have what is called as plantar tarso-metatarsal ligament. So this plantar ligament is the strongest one, and it runs to second metatarsal as well as the third metatarsal. So this is all about your ligament, Lisfranc ligament complex. So this everything is called as ligament, Lisfranc ligament complex. And if you have to talk about ligament, Lisfranc ligament alone, it is an articulation between connection between middle cuneiform and second metatarsal base. So talking about Lisfranc injuries, so this is basically a tarso-metatarsal injury. So this involves the tarso-metatarsal joint, and you can have purely ligament injury, or you can have fracture dislocation. So you have a spectrum. Either you have ligament injury, or you can have a fracture dislocation as well. So how do this injury occurs? Usually there is an axial load through hyperplantar flex forefoot. So your forefoot is hyperplantar flex, and there is an axial loading, as in case of when you are landing from a height. So clinical assessment, usually this patient will have severe pain in their foot and they won't be able to bear weight. So this is an indication that patient might have Lisfranc injury. And these injuries are usually missed in case of multiple injured patient or patient who is unconscious, because if you see an X-ray in pure ligament injury, there won't be any fracture, and most of the time we think that there is no injury to foot. So in examination, you will have a typical medial plantar bruising. So you always have to look for this. If you have bruising in midfoot area and the plantar aspect on the medial side, you always have to suspect Lisfranc injury. So in radiograph, you have to, because this is a dislocation, you have to get a lateral view and then your normal AP and oblique view. So how do you diagnose Lisfranc injury? In normal AP view, you have to draw a line. So this is the second metatarsal, and this is your medial cuneiform, this is your middle cuneiform. So if you draw a line from the medial aspect of second metatarsal and continue that line proximally, this should touch your medial cuneiform, not the medial cuneiform, it should touch your middle cuneiform. So if you have a Lisfranc injury, there will be widening between first and second metatarsal. So if you draw a line, this line won't touch your middle cuneiform. So if this line doesn't touch your middle cuneiform and falls laterally, then you have to suspect you have a less frank injury. Similarly, in oblique view, your fourth metatarsal should be in line with your cuboid. This is your cuboid bone. So if this line is also disrupted, that means you have a less frank injury. And you need a lateral dislocation, because if you have injury to all the three ligaments we talked about, the Lisfranc ligament, dorsal ligament, as well as the plantar ligament. So if you have injury to all three ligaments, you will have a dislocation as well. So in lateral view, you'll see dorsal dislocation of the second metatarsal base. So these fractures will require surgical intervention. You cannot treat these injuries conservatively. So you can do either a closed reduction or an open reduction, and then reduce the joint and then fix it with screws. Now talking about fifth metatarsal base fractures. So like your metacarpal, this metatarsal also has a head, a neck, diaphysis, and a base. So we'll be talking about the base fractures. So base is usually divided into three zones: zone 1, zone 2, and zone 3. And why these are divided into zone 3? Because you have a typical fracture pattern in each zone. So zone 1 fractures, we call them pseudo-Jones fracture. So if patient has a plantar flexion and hindfoot injury, like a simple twisting injury of the ankle, patient can have a zone 1 injury of the fifth metatarsal base. Zone 2 injury, if patient along with plantar flexion and hindfoot inversion also has a forefoot adduction, then you will have a fracture running in the zone 2. So this will be known as Jones fracture. So any fracture involving the second zone will be Jones fracture. And in zone 3, you will have a repeated microtrauma. Somebody with a cavus foot who have a high middle arch will have injury to the diaphyseal region. So this will be your diaphyseal region. This line will be your metaphyseal diaphyseal junction. So zone 3 is typically a diaphyseal injury, and this in zone 3 you will usually have a stress fracture. So in radiograph, now if you have a patient with injury to the fifth metatarsal base fracture, so you need to know whether this fracture involves zone 1, zone 2, or zone 3. How are you going to do that? If you see in zone 1, so zone 1 is a tuberosity fracture, and if you follow the fracture line, this fracture will run into the articulation between fifth metatarsal and cuboid bone. So this fracture line will run towards the cuboid bone. So this means this is a zone 1 injury. In zone 2 injury, if you follow the fracture line, this fracture line will run towards the fourth and fifth metatarsal joint line. So you will have in fracture line running towards the fourth and fifth metatarsal joint. And in zone 3, this is proximal to your fourth and fifth metatarsal joint. So this will be a purely a diaphyseal injury. Now for zone 1 injury, these are low velocity injury, and usually you won't have problem with union. So zone 1 injuries can be treated conservatively in a below knee cast. So you give below knee cast for around 6 to 8 weeks. And patient usually this fractures, zone 1 fractures will unite well. For zone 2 and zone 3 fracture, both have a precarious blood supply, because you have metaphyseal blood supply as well as diaphyseal blood supply, and in between this diaphyseal and metaphyseal blood supply, there is a watershed zone. So this zone 2 and zone 3 fracture are notorious for non-union. You can have non-union rates of up to 30% in zone 2 and zone 3 fracture. So it is better to treat this fracture surgically. So you can do an intramedullary screw fixation, where a screw is passed percutaneously and you get compression at the fracture site. Now talking about Marx fracture, usually these are stress fracture, and usually Marx fracture are seen in military recruitments or someone who is involved in gymnast or ballet dancing. So they have a stress fracture of the distal second or third metatarsal fracture. So how this patient will present to you? They will present with a vague foot pain that is related to activity and relieves with rest. So they will have pain only on activity, and usually the pain gets relieved on rest. So if you take an X-ray, initial radiographs might be negative because these are stress fracture and the fracture line may not be visible initially. So if you ask the patient to be on follow-up and you take an X-ray after 2 to 3 weeks, you can see a callus formation. So this signifies that patient had a stress fracture of the third metatarsal neck region. If you want to be sure if you want to rule out whether this patient has a stress fracture or not, you can do an MRI. MRI will pick up this occult stress fracture. So you will see if you get a negative X-ray and if you do an MRI, you might see a stress fracture. So treatment for this stress fracture is cast for 6 weeks. Usually with 6 weeks, these fractures will unite. Okay. So thank you. If you have any queries, you can ask me in the chat box.